Hi guys, it's Generation Z with you, and it's me, Diana, and today we have a special guest again.
Thank you, Diana, for the invite. My name is Adam, and I shall be talking with Diana today.
And you know Adam already because we discussed with him very important topic of our 21st century and which is appropriate for Generation Z. It was terrorism. And today we're going to talk about the fall of democracies in all of the countries. So basically, the problem is that there are many democratic governments that are now considering as a failure, and they losing their support every single day. We can see it because of Brexit. We can see it in South America. We can see it even in the US. I'm not talking about Russia already. So basically, today we're going to talk about the problems of liberalism and why the democracies fall. And my first question to you, Adam, is: do you agree with me that democracies are now coming to the end?
With that particular statement, I would not agree that democracy is not coming to an end, but there is significantly a decrease in the spirit of democracy in the world. However, I do not think that it's going to be the death of democracy anytime soon.
And why do you think democracies started and now continue to fall?
Well, I believe that the response for that is particularly the evidence for this is particularly seen in the last couple of decades of the 20th century, and now in the 21st century we also have that. And if we look at the evidence also, we see that, well, according to the Democracy Index report by the Economist Intelligence Unit, we see that out of 167 countries that were ranked this year, 89 of them received a lower score than last year's. So definitely we see a decrease in democracy, at least in the spirit of democracy and the fundamental principles. However, I believe the cause of that, to put it bluntly and to summarize what I think, is two factors. I think it's basically the mass movements of people into Europe that have sped up, because this has been going on since the Second World War, but it has sped up significantly from North Africa, from the Middle East, from Eastern Asia. And secondly, it's probably the Europeans. They lost faith in themselves. They have gone aside from the fundamental principal values of democracy, or at least of the Europeanism in them. So I think that it's those two factors that are intertwined and therefore collide and therefore result in a decrease of essentially democratic values.
You said that Europeans have lost their faith in themselves. And according to Plato, for example, he had the circle system of the rule, and he stated that there are four different periods in human's history. The first one is democracy, when people of military rule. Then there is, because of the excess of military ambitions, there is oligarchy. These oligarchs come to power and they have everything in excess when it comes to the wealthiness. They have a lot of money. People do not like it because people need to obey to people who have lots of money. And after that, the democracies started to boom. So basically, the problem of democracy is that everything is in excess. And according to Plato, after democracy, there is always tyranny. Do you agree that because of the freedom of everything, freedom of speech, freedom of power, we have everything in excess? Everyone wants to have power right now. So do you agree with Plato that after democracies, and we can face this fact, there will be lots of totalitarian regimes?
Well, I would agree with that, most certainly, because from that is a very accurate statement, what Plato is saying, because I believe that democracy is basically the intertwining of Judeo-Christian values and Greek reason, and that is also the characteristic of Western civilization. And so basically, when you don't have reason, you fall into you fall into religious tyranny. And if you do not have any kind of values straining from religion, you have therefore just secular tyranny. So of course there has to be a balance, and if we do not have democracy, then alternatively we see governments today in the world actually which do not have democratic systems, or they're quasi-democratic. They're a mutilation of democratic systems. Like, for example, what is going on now in the Venezuelan, in the country of Venezuela. So I would say most certainly that if you do not have, as democracy, the root Latin word of it, demos and kratos, the rule of the people, if you do not give the people the rule, then you most certainly fall into a tyranny of sorts. I would agree to that, most certainly.
And do you think that in the future these democracies will die and we're going to have totalitarian regimes?
No, I don't think so. I think democracy is still strong. The core principles of democracy are one of the greatest ones that there are. And there's 6 of them, obviously. There's the democracy. This is seen in America, actually, the beacon, you could say, of democracy. That it's basically the worth of the individual, giving individual a certain value, straining also from Judeo-Christian values, equality of all persons, where the majority rules and the minority still has its rights, as well as compromise, individual freedom, and duties and responsibilities. All of these things together form a certain democratic system. Of course, there's the economic point of free markets, but you need all those 6 basic fundamental principles to have a successful democratic government. From what I know, currently from the index I've been saying about the democracy index, there's currently 25 countries out of the 167 that are, by that standard, fully democratic, and that number is very small. But you can realize that you can see that in these countries, those particular values are very strong. And if you have, and the point of these kind of values is to spread them via information, knowledge, wisdom, not via coercion or violent, annexations, for example.
But the irony is that the statistics shows that this year, less than the half of the world's population lives in a democracy of some sort. And the problem is that 1/3 of the global population lives in outright authoritarian regimes. Primarily, this is because of the huge population of China. And the percentage of the world's population that lives in a full democracy fell less to 5% of the globe. We are here in the 21st century, and generations that our generation is facing the problem that we basically do not have access to democracy. If you speak about Russia, if you speak about Europe right now in Brexit, we have lots of propaganda. We do not have freedom of speech. We do not have freedom of media. We do not have freedom, for some kind of rivals. Because, for example, Gilets jaunes in France, they still protesting because of and against of democratic government. Though, and I'm not talking about right now the Southern America, because this is a disaster there happening in Venezuela, Brazil, and even in the United States. It would seem that it needs to be absolutely democratic country. Even in the United States, media is falling apart, and media do not know what to do with the current situation. The president, because journalists are being attacked every day, and people, I can say, they do not know what to think about, because people cannot trust their power, and people do not trust the media because they think that media is biased. So the problem is that, do you think that what will be in the end? Will it be democracy or will it be totalitarian regime?
Where in particular?
Let's say in Europe.
I mean, I think there's a couple things you said that I want to get back to because I think they're important when it comes to this topic. I think in Europe, tyranny is it's a very far-fetched concept. The countries have come too far for when it comes to their development and its social fabric, essentially, to fall apart into tyranny. You can see that the European society is very elite skeptical. For example, in Poland, we do not really trust the politicians, and rightfully so. I don't think that we should trust any person who wants to be a politician, because why would you want to do that? And I think that's healthy, because if we are skeptical of people, that means we look at them closely. We analyze what they do. We look at if they are the best people to if this is the best person to represent me. So I think being skeptical, I don't think we should idolize politicians, because that's a bad thing, in my opinion.
So do you think that people should not like the people who rule them?
They shouldn't. there should be a different relationship between the people and politicians and the people and celebrities. You can idolize a celebrity, an artist, a singer, what have you, but you should not give the same amount of attention and love or fascination to politicians.
But do they get it now? Like,
They do.
Name me the politician who gets the same amount of love as Madonna or Taylor Swift.
Okay, well, I can't tell you exactly in terms of percent of people who love, but I know right now in Poland everyone is fascinated with Biedroń, with Robert Biedroń, because of the new party Wiosna, because he came out because he's an open homosexual, and people love him without even actually. He was a pretty good mayor of Słupsk, but you should not idolize those people just because they're politics. They're people who should make your lives better. They're essentially the public servants. You should not idolize public servants. You are the ones choosing them. Nobody else. They want your vote, so they should work to convince you why you should vote for them. They should not depend on, oh well, I'm popular, therefore I will win. You should actually just look closely and with critical thinking analyze politicians. And I think it's a bad thing when we idolize politicians, because then we look at them as people rather than as, well, you should be looking at them as people, but we look at them as as our idols, and we agree with them on everything, rather than looking, with a sober mind and thinking, will this benefit the country? That's what I think.
Would you say that, okay, Europe and United States and Australia, they will remain democratic, right?
Yes.
But would you say that South America can fall into totalitarian regime?
I think South America is already within totalitarian regimes. You have a history, the continent has a history of military juntas ruling the place and fighting with each other, military coups over anything, really. You had Hugo Chavez, now you have Maduro. You look at the countries, and it's very unfortunate for those people who wish to, live in peace and have a stable country in which they have something to eat, because right now if you look at the images from Venezuela, it's absolutely horrible, and people just usurp power and use the police against the people. How can you use your tools of ruling against people who elect you? That, for me, it's just I just can't understand that.
And would you say that Asia would fall into totalitarian regime?
I mean, I would not think that no, absolutely no. I don't think Asia is going to fall into anything like North Korea, because North Korea is based simply on power and suppression of people, and that is what actually one of my arguments, actually one of my one of my perspectives upon this idea of North Korea, attacking other people. They can't afford that, because power is a very it's a very crumbling thing. As soon as the people in North Korea realize that Kim Jong-un does not have the power they think he has, they're going to overthrow him, because you can see that the people, the masses, are something stronger than anyone can think of. You look at the French Revolution, you look at the Russian Revolution. People can do anything if they have a purpose, if they have a movement.
But North Korea has China near them, and I wouldn't say that China is a very democratic country, actually, which is the great part of Asia.
Of course, it's not a democratic country, not at all, but it does have certain interests when it comes to economy, and it works on a quasi-capitalist system in which quasi-capitalist, I say that because they're more of a socialist economy. If you look at it, all the successful businesses are approved essentially and funded also at the very beginning by the Chinese government. And they know that their economic losses would be huge. And that's right now the basis of China. It's the economy. I don't think they would get themselves involved into a situation which is not potentially beneficial to them. Because if China, for example, helps North Korea stabilize itself after a potential civil war, China is going to have to take the burden of funding North Korea constantly and, trying to bring it up into some sort of sufficient level of growth, domestic product, and development. I don't think China is willing to take that step.
But the point is that I wouldn't say that the fall of democracy globally, it's not a process that happens all of a sudden. So it took some time for democracies to exist and then to fall. So why do you think that after two world wars, where it was the fascism, where was this huge totalitarian power, people now go back to it?
They go back to fascism?
They go back to totalitarian regimes.
Well, because the Second World War was not a war against authoritarianism, it was a war against fascism. If the Soviet Union continued to be on the, well, I would say the attacker side, because it's hard to label them Axis, because they were not the Axis side. But because they switched sides, the war against totalitarianism, against authoritarianism, became a war against fascism, essentially. Because otherwise, you see all the powers that lost, all the Axis sides, Germany, the Third Reich, the Imperial Japan, they all lost their authoritarian status. But the Soviet Union continued because they were the victors, which is a problem. And then, therefore, they sponsored dictatorships and authoritarian rules all over the world as a way to spread communism. Cuba is still an authoritarian socialist country because essentially of Soviet-sponsored revolutionary movements in Latin America. So you can see that it's not a fight between ideologies. It's rather a fight of principles. It was rather a fight of democracy or socialism. So I mean, I think democratic values are way more attractive, and I don't think that they're going to fall, because essentially when you think of democracy, you think of America, and you think of all the good that America has brought you. iPhones, for example, technology. It's something amazing. You don't think, when you think of, all these other countries, you don't think democracy, and you also don't think of products from those countries like China.
And why do you think they are necessary apart from products in the 21st century? Because honestly, some people and some experts, and as we see some statistics, show that democracies show pretty low effectiveness. We have war in Syria, we have always troubles in Ukraine, Russia, we have Brexit right now, we have problems even in the US, we have on the border Mexico and the US border, and again South America. So all over the world, democracies do not show the effectiveness people wish for.
Meaning that what you're saying is that democratic countries are not as effective as we think they are because their values are so good. Well, I think I think that the also question is, why is democracy so attractive? Why do people want to go into democratic countries to work? Why do people why do people cross the Mexican border? It's not just Mexicans; it's people from the entire South America trajectory. Why do they want to cross into a democratic country? Mexico is a democratic country, but why do they want to? Why don't they want to stay in Mexico? Why do they want to go into the U.S.? Why does Africa and people from the Middle East and people from Eastern Asia, why do they want to go to Europe? I think it's a lot more attractive, mainly because of economic benefits, but also because those countries are very tolerant in a way that I think the death of Europe. It's a good book. I forgot the name of the author escapes me, but it's I think the death of Europe. It's basically about that. In Europe we have this incredible guilt that we owe those people something. We owe the people of the world in Europe. We owe everyone in the world a certain amount of. We're guilty because those people are behind now in the socioeconomic spheres because of our imperialist tendencies. I think it's unnecessary guilt, that led to a certain expansion of migration and therefore divisions within the societies. Now you can see in Europe the entire discussion is regarding immigration. You look at Great Britain with the whole Brexit thing. They want their splendid isolationism. Why? Because they want to isolate themselves from the problems of the continent, which one is, for example, immigration. And they don't. And people want to retain their national identity. I don't think there's anything wrong with that.
Wouldn't you say that Europe is far too tolerant already? Because this tolerance already provoked immigration crisis, and immigration crisis is one of the reasons the United Kingdom wants to leave the European Union. Wouldn't you say that this is what the Plato was afraid of, that already now, for example, Europe democracies have too much in excess? too much freedom, too much tolerance in excess. It already provokes problems in the continent, in democratic countries.
I mean, I would agree with that, and I think the problem is that the European Union became a supra-state in a way that it's, instead of just being an economic cooperation as it first started out with the steel and coal, joint effort that later turned into the European Union. I think because the European Union started, in a way, spewing a lot of very ultra-tolerant rhetoric. It forced other countries to, for example, take in migrants. So it wasn't natural assimilation of people. It wasn't natural tolerance. It was artificial. And people resisted to that because they didn't. I think tolerance is a process that people get accustomed to over time. It cannot be forced on you. That's why I think in Poland right now, a lot of the population is frustrated with this entire LGBT issue, for example. It's a grand discussion right now in Poland because it's being forced upon people. The discussion is forced upon people. It's not a natural cause. It's not a natural event. It doesn't happen. The politics, for some reason, constantly want to talk about it, and it annoys people. And apparently, on the world stage, we're ignorant and intolerant because in Poland we simply, maybe we don't understand. We're not ready for it. We're still a society that has problems of our own, and we do not need additional problems. But the world stage doesn't care, and we're labeled as intolerant.
And would you say that is there any sphere where a totalitarian regime is better than democratic?
I would not say totalitarian regime is better than democratic anywhere. Maybe authoritarian in some cases, but they're very extreme. I'm thinking interwar year Poland. An authoritarian regime under Piłsudski was way more effective than I imagine a democratic system, because the country was in ruins. You had 3 different Polands essentially, and they had to be brought together because Poland was recreated after 123 years. I don't think a totalitarian state, to answer your question, I don't think a totalitarian state would work better than a democracy, unless maybe some quasi-totalitarian states such as a monarchy where the ruler is perfect and he's all good and all being. Of course, it comes down to the people. If there's a very good person, such as the totalitarian state, if there's a very good, tolerant, morally, rationally positive leader, tyrant, if you could say, kind of ironic, then he's way better than a corrupt, democratically evil elected president. So yes.
You mentioned Piłsudski and Poland, and right now we have different countries which have the same problem. They are divided, they have different political or religious views, the population is divided, and they still have democratic regimes. Would you say that it's better for these countries with such problems to have an authoritarian leader, for example, to make them all together and to make good for them? Instead of democratic regimes where people need to choose, do I want this president and do I want this president? Wouldn't it be better to consolidate the power in one hands and to put the country into the order?
Okay, but who selects the people?
Which people?
Well, who selects the people who are going to be ruling this authoritarian state?
Who selected Piłsudski?
Well, those were generals. That was the military, basically.
Let it be military or ministers of government, for example.
Well, here's the thing: if we allow the ministers who have been chosen as leaders by a certain population, 30% of the population chose them because we had a very low turnout during the election time. I don't think so, because.
I'm not talking about Poland, but
no, I don't think that would work. I don't think that would work because you would need a framework in which somebody has to elect that other person. Otherwise, I'm sorry. The other result is basically a civil war, because whoever is the strongest becomes the leader. Essentially, whoever has more guns becomes the leader.
For example, right now in Syria, we have different powers. We have American powers, Russian powers, European powers, Syrian powers. Wouldn't you think that it would be better if Syria comes up with a person who would like to have negotiations with all of the powers, who would consolidate power even by force, but who would put Syria into final order and people would stop dying. But still, there wouldn't be democracy. Okay, Syrian people would not vote.
Well, well, here's the thing: if the people select the person, then there is a spirit of democracy. A country doesn't have to be democratic by label, by official, by formality. But
No, if this person will be selected by, for example, military people or whoever in power there right now.
Military tends to be very aggressive, and it's kind of ironic that the military wants to end violence with violence. So I mean that's a very difficult area because, for example, right now one of the groups interested in power in Syria has been defeated. ISIS has been officially defeated from Syria, thanks to the American forces. So I mean it would be very difficult because in Syria the current dictator, the current authoritarian leader Assad is backed by Russia. So I think no country essentially has its own sovereignty in that region because it's a conflict of interests. If America didn't have any interest there, if Russia didn't have any interest there, they would not be there. I think when it comes to authoritarianism, it all comes down to who the person is. Essentially, you can be a very good authoritarian leader, and you can be a very bad democratically elected person. So I think that's the difference. It's in human nature, and we strive to power.
And talking about Generation Z, which now is growing up, which direction do you think we will choose? Democratic or totalitarian? Looking at which processes are happening now in the world and that democracies do not show their effectiveness the way we would like them to. Do you think the young generation would be more prone to democracies or to authoritarian regimes in future?
I mean, I want to believe that Generation Z that's growing up is going to be more attracted towards democracy. I don't think of any situation in which people would want to have a totalitarian state or an authoritarian state. Actually, I think the bigger conversation, the bigger opposing forces right now is not democracy and totalitarianism or authoritarianism. It's actually democracy and socialism. A state ruled by one party, which is a degree of authoritarianism. But no, I believe that democracy will thrive, but its spirit is dying, but democracy will exist. As you said before, that a lot of the countries are living in a democracy of some sort. I don't think democracy is the perfect system in the world. As I believe Churchill said, it's the worst system out of all. I mean, it's the best system but it's the worst system, but it's the best one we have. I think I still believe in people, and I believe that if people have purpose in life, and that is something that people are lacking today, if people have purpose in life, that they will transfer that onto their political life.
You said that democracies are dying, and I totally agree with that, but what's the factor or which actions or measures should be taken to bring them back to life?
I mean, I think it's decreasing. I don't think it's dying because...
it was your words, so decreasing.
Yeah, I think it's most certainly decreasing with all these populist, nationalist movements right now we see. One thing for sure I would bring back, I wish I could change, is that people would essentially start trusting one another. Because I think we're so skeptical of within the society of each other that in many cases when we vote, we don't vote honestly. We just vote because a person I don't like is voting for someone else, so I'm going to counter that. One thing in order for the democratic spirit to return, I would certainly give those people purpose. And certainly, when it comes to a larger scale, for example, the European Union, I would strongly reconsider the immigration policies right now, because
Would you stop them, or would
I
you
wouldn't stop
proceed?
them, but I would make them more efficient. Definitely, I don't like the policies of open borders, essentially, which is Schengen, that countries can exchange, because basically what it's saying is just come into any country and then you have an open road toward any country in the European Union, and a lot of people are crossing over illegally, and maybe some of them are good people, maybe some of them are bad people. But the thing is, the moment we let in people from anywhere and without any purpose, or or even the spirit of European culture, and without the will to assimilate, I think we're letting in people who will essentially dilute and further divide the country. So I think immigration is a very strong thing that would definitely revive democracy, because people have to believe in themselves. People have to be proud of their nationality. We cannot, in the European Union, we cannot assimilate nationalism to something egregious, to something evil. It's not. Nationalism is by definition something to be proud of. You're supposed to be proud of your country, and you're supposed to have certain values that you like. But if we think of just open borders for everyone and no national identity, then why not just become one country if we're all the same, essentially? I think democracy works because we are people of different nature from every other country. And you can see that during the European parliamentary, debates and European Council meetings. Everyone has a different vision. If we didn't, then we would have agreements on everything virtually every day. We're all different, and we have to remember that. But we're binded by certain Judeo-Christian values and Greek reason, as I said before, that allows us for rationality and having fundamental morals.
And do you think it will be possible in future to establish democratic regimes in countries which now suffer from authority?
We tried that already in Iraq, I believe, and Afghanistan. Didn't work out very well. The problem is that we believe because it's working in our countries, it's going to work in other countries, and that's not necessarily the case. Those people have to figure out on their own what kind of system they want to be. Because we cannot force something on other people, because we do not understand their culture, we do not understand their traditions, their history. So I think it's important to offer them opportunities, help them with certain evils in the world, such as tyrants, such as terrorist groups, extremist groups. We should help them with those, but we should not implement governments or regimes into their countries, because that's self-destructive. A democracy that is implemented in harsh, violent ways is missing the point of its fundamental principles. Democracy should be chosen by the government. The style of government, the style of rule should be chosen by the people. Then it's a democracy if they get to choose. And if they choose a democracy, then that's great. If they don't, well, democracy won't work everywhere.
So you think that authoritarian and totalitarian regimes have a right to exist if people would like them to on this or that territory?
Sure, yeah, if it works. Go ahead.
And if so, I agree with that totally, but I'm just afraid that, don't you think that these controversies can cause conflicts in the future?
Between those nations?
Between democratic and between different regimes, socialism, totalitarianism, militarism even in some countries.
Well, obviously there's always going to be conflict between two types of regimes. You have the
global,
Cold War.
like World War.
I'm not sure that nowadays ideology plays such a great role. I think right now we're mostly fighting over resources and just showing other countries that we're more powerful out of principle. I think the Cold War ended war over ideologies. Otherwise, we would fight everyone who differs from the Western style civilization.
But Eastern civilization right now fights with everyone who different from them. We see that because of terrorist attacks. Not of course all the Eastern civilization. I'm talking about super radical Muslim groups and all of
Yes,
that.
but then you have radical groups who have no place essentially in the world because they adhere from certain moral and rational principles of, and they adhere from the United Nations Charter. They're not they're not legitimate in their actions nor in their existence actually on the world stage to be running countries. D- they're just evil people. So I don't think that countries are. I don't think that countries that have working regimes are fighting each other. You see them fighting non-territorial actors such as terrorist groups, of course, but you don't see. Right now, there's only conflict over territory. It's not over ideology, like the Kashmir conflict or the Kashmir incident nowadays. It's over territory. It's not over ideology. They don't care. Like one group, they're of both different religions, different ethnicities, different cultures. They don't care about that. They just want their territory.
And the last question is there hope for democracies after all?
Of course, democracy won't die. That's what I believe. Democracy is one of the greatest systems that there is, because it recognizes every individual to have potential, to have value, to have some sort of worth to the entire world, and it essentially gives power to every single person. I don't think democracy is going anywhere. I don't think it's going to die. Well, mostly because most of the superpowers in the world, superpowers, I'm talking economically and militarily, are democratic. So we have that, luckily. Otherwise, if you look at democratic systems, they're very stable. And of course, you have biased media who are trying to diminish democratic rule. For example, nowadays in the U.S., we see constantly CNN, MSNBCs being against President Donald Trump, and stations like Fox News being pro-Donald Trump. But that's how it's always been. Media is there to check on itself, to check on other, essentially, to bring to light things that are happening. And if people believe that, well, they probably have their own set of hierarchy and their own set of their own set of values in a hierarchy. And it's actually, the media encourages people to vote, which is a good thing, because it encourages people, don't vote for him, vote for that person. I think that democracy starts at a person, and I don't think it's going anywhere, because what's the alternative?
Okay, guys, on this hopeful and grateful note, we're gonna end this program. It was Generations That with you. Kisses and stay tuned.